can we say this is a basic analysis, and now
Yes.
you'll show us a more advanced one, right?
Absolutely. So this
Got
would
it.
be just like setting it up by basic.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you want to go granular, what you can do is you can set up multiple different events. Like everything that the player can do in the game can be an event, and set up that in the funnel. So you don't end up having a funnel just like level to level, but what happens between the levels, right?
Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of ROI One-on-One. I'm Roman from Tangent, and today we'll talk about retention. In one of your comments, you said, "Oh, it's easy to get 1 billion downloads. The real question is how to keep all those people." And this is why we invited Michal to chat about it. Michal, a few words about yourself.
Hey, Roman. Thank you very much for inviting me. So I'm Michal in Slovakian. I'm Slovakian, based in Slovakia, and I work as a consultant. I have worked in the game industry for over a decade, worked on various titles, various different genres, but my focus is mainly mobile casual games. Could be a bit of a hybrid casual, hyper casual before, and I'm more interested into retaining players for a longer period and provide game as a service for a long time. So 10-year, 15-year-old games. That's something that I pay attention to, and especially how they are able to retain the players for that long.
Nice. Yeah, and you post a lot on LinkedIn and all about all those like mechanics. So I thought like, yeah, that's the person I want to talk about this. And you prepared some slides for us. I'll just start sharing so we can go
Absolutely.
through them. Boom. Retention versus churn.
All
Yeah,
right.
what's the difference, Michal?
My favorite topic. So, as you said, like I post a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. I have kind of interest in figuring out, as a game designer, my job mainly is to work on features and focus on features. But that's the kind of like main focus of a game designer. The overall kind of bigger picture of that is, how do you provide experience to players that captures their attention and retains them, makes them come back. So in free to play, we know that the player does not spend any money when they install the game, so we want to retain that player for as long as they can enjoy the game and start spending money. So it's a very tricky situation. And I think that a lot of people just pay attention to retention. So what I did on the slide is put a retention against the churn. And so maybe I can explain what the typically what we looking at when it comes to saying the word retention and focusing on retention. So retention is coined far more in free to play games than it is in premium games. So in free to play, we pay a lot of attention to retention, but not necessarily to the churn. Now, what the graph shows here is, it shows actually both. It shows the retention, it shows the churn as well. So the definition of retention is, by default, is the player who's staying in the game, and the opposite of retention would be a churn, is all the players that have left the game. So it's very easy to just spend time looking at retention and thinking about what the retention is, and how do we increase the retention or maintain the retention 100%. But the opposite of that is as important as the retention itself. So the way I go about thinking about retaining players is thinking about the both aspects of the experience. So what retains, what keeps players in the game, but also what pushes them out of the game, and that would be the churn. So on the slide, I put a couple of things. So when we think about retention, we think about motivation, rewards, gameplay progression. Some of these are features, some of these are kind of methodologies that help you understand what keeps the player in the game. And on the other side, there's a churn. These are friction points, cognitive load, install size, complexity, ANRs. In other words, ANRs, application non-responsive, anything that would technologically interfere with your experience. So I put these two against each other as a kind of plus and minus poles. So you could be picking when you decide to increase your retention or improve your retention. You could be picking from both sides. Does it make sense to you, Roman?
Yeah. Just want to ask about the A and R, but you already answered that one.
All right. So A&R is actually really important because it could happen at the beginning of launching a game, where it could be, hey, this game is loading for 30, a minute or minute and 30. Some of the bigger games sometimes have a lot of download, a lot of content to download, right? So this, it's not necessarily, the application is not responsive, but the application or the game itself is kind of like in a vegetable state, right? And the player cannot enjoy the game because there's a lot of technicality going on behind. So A&R in behind there is far bigger, but A&R is one of the things that would definitely cause a churn, because if your game is not responsive, the player's probably thinking closing the game and going to another one.
Right. Makes sense. And I think might be like a lot of other like factors like this. This is why you have a question mark here.
Absolutely. So the one that I put the closest to the churn is friction point. So you want to focus on whatever creates a friction in your game. So this could be multiple features. This could be just the way the UI works or interacts, the way the controls work. There could be multiple different things. They're not necessarily features. There could be you have ads in your game, and those ads, those ads that display the X button to the right top corner. Now you tap that, okay, and it suddenly takes you to the store instead of closing that ad, right? So that's a friction point that has not necessarily anything to do with your experience, as in terms of design of your experience, but it's an SDK that is creating a friction point in your game. So you may think about potentially removing that advertising agency or that particular SDK, or fixing that problem because it's creating friction point in the seamless experience that you've designed.
Right. Can we name like the most common factor based on your experience? I know like we all need to keep in mind all of them, but when someone comes to you, what is the most frequent thing that they have?
Do you want from retention or from the churn?
Let's do one for both. Yeah.
Okay. So from the retention, I would say like the one thing that not necessarily the clients know and come to me saying, hey, look, we want to improve our motivation for the player to play our game, right? But it is likely the outcome of the conversation where I look at the game and see what feature sets and what gameplay style we have and what is the audience that they're targeting, and see the problem in that overlaps between what you're trying to do in your game and the players that you're targeting. So you got two options. You can either start targeting different audience and find the audience that would respond and resonate, the audience that would resonate with your game, or you can start changing your feature set, potentially gameplay, right? So in terms of a motivation, there's you could assume that the players like the game. It's fun. The game is fun, but you haven't measured that. You haven't done anything in terms of qualitative measurements in figuring out whether the gameplay, the core gameplay actually resonates with the players, right? And so often it comes to a point where, I don't want to play this game because it's not fun, right? So the player's missing motivation, whether that's intrinsic or extrinsic. So the extrinsic is very easy. You put a bunch of rewards in there, you organize the progression, you organize the systems in such a way that it motivates player to play. But the intrinsic motivation is something that makes the player have fun, right?
Right.
And it's very difficult to fix that one once you have 6 months long development going on and the game is just not fun. Or you could have a longer period of development, but you haven't thought about that fact that players are not motivated to play this because it's boring, right?
Right.
So you could put as many rewards as you want, but if the motivation, the intrinsic motivation is missing, is very difficult to fix. And the motivation will be the outcome of the searching for what is missing in the game. Why is the retention low, right? Now churn is easier because churn is like you can think about this. Churn is more like a defensive game. So you take a game of soccer or football in Europe. The goal of the goal of the gameplay is to give a goal, right, to the opponent. Now, so that means you have to go into offensive, right? So that's retention. I think about retention as an offensive, right? If you have right motivation, the players are staying there having fun. It's the same on the pitch. If you have players who are going in the offensive, they're going to score a goal. You're probably going to win the game. But the churn is like the defensive, right? If your opponent is really, really tough, right? You could have players in your game who are expecting quite a lot from your game. So they're expecting no friction point. Your UI and UX is smooth. Everything makes sense. They're expecting certain set of features. So there's like very little cognitive load. There's no friction points. Everything installs correctly, runs correctly, no ANRs. The complexity is just right for the players. This is like you've sorted out your defenses really well, or your defensive strategy really well, so that your opponent can be pretty much anything. You're ready for it, and you can go into offensive because your defensive gameplay is really good. So if your defenses are really bad, then your opponent, no matter how good your offensive game is, your opponent is going to win because you're not thinking about those things that introduce problems for the players. So your player would be like, I like this game, but the UI is pissing me off, or the game is crashing, or I always have to overcome like 3 or 5 clicks before I get something done in the game. So there's a lot of friction, there's a lot of cognitive load and unnecessary complexity in the game. So in this kind of scenario, I like to look at the churn first, because we can sort out the defensive pretty fast. But then soon as we have resources and we want to go into offensive, we sort out the motivation. So it's a kind of a balance you need to strike between the retention and churn.
Yeah, I really like this analogy of like the game, like football, offense, defense. Like you really need to have both, right? So love it.
Yeah.
Okay, all clear here. We can move on.
Cool. Let's go to the couple of the examples. So we'll take a couple of retention examples and maybe break it down in retention and churn. So the good strategy over here on retention is of course everybody's looking at data. You come from Tenjin, you're looking ton of data, right? And the data analytics is like a backbone, but it's not necessarily the backbone, because this picture is like, I really like this picture because it illustrates what happens when you don't have a data. So just to explain that, the absence of the red dots on the plane demonstrate that we don't have data on what happened to all the planes that would have the red dots in the places where they're missing, right? So the absence of data tells us that the plane either crashed or never returned. So most of these planes that return would have red dots in these areas, but the planes that didn't return, that gives us no indication what happened, but we probably know what happened. The plane crash never returned, right? So we don't know what exactly happened. We can assume, but what we can make from this assumption is that we don't have the data for here, and that tells us enough. So the same thing applies in the games, right? Especially onboarding and fatui activities, right? So in the onboarding and fatui, we often use the funnels, right? So I'll show you a couple of things in terms of funnels, how we can set up funnels in a more granular way that you don't miss data and you can figure stuff out. The gameplay activities are good to retention strategy.
Michal, what is FTUE?
Okay, so actually I don't call it anymore first time user experience, because the user itself implicates that you would be using something, right? Like substances, but you can't use. You're not really using anything.
I see.
You're having fun, so you're a player. Most of the time in the games, we talk about players. So first-time player experience would be the best example of what the focus would be in terms of retention strategy. So the first time means when you install the game, launch the game, what is the first thing that you see in the game? What is your first time experience? This could be 10 minutes, this could be 15 minutes, this could be, for as long as your first session lasts, right? So it's a variable metric, but it's very important to pay attention to. And then onboarding could be the onboarding itself could be happening multiple times throughout the sessions, even multiple times throughout the longevity of your game. So every time you introduce something new, there should be a certain level of onboarding, unless it's obvious to the player.
Got it.
So in terms of gameplay activities, this one is big because you want to provide some kind of gameplay, something to do in game. So it's probably a point to pay attention to what are the gameplay activities and maybe put them in buckets. Now, gameplay loops is kind of it's a game designer's dilemma. That's how it call it. So everybody calls them, we have gameplay loops, we have the game loops and things like that. But it's actually far more difficult to figure out if the game loops. And by looping, that means that it starts from one place and then comes back to the same place, right? So that by default, that's what loop means. But in gameplay loops, what's happening could be multiple different activities, different progressions. We often use the word gameplay and meta, or core and meta. So there could be multiple different activities. So by default, I put it below the activities. It's far more abstract way of thinking about games. Progression and meta we use very often. And then retention features. The retention features, you can think about, the immediate one that comes to my mind would be your daily reward, something that attracts the player to come back, but they're not necessarily core activity in the game. So let's take a look at a couple of these. I'm actually going to skip this one, but let's go directly to this one. So this would be a typical Fatui funnel. Do you see funnels like this, Raman?
Yeah, I mean, is it like a typical funnel? Is it like some sort of cohort? What does each bar stands for?
So each bar stands for a level. So
so then it's a funnel. Yeah.
Yeah. So you would set up in a level-based game. You would set up a funnel that directly step by step, and each step is a level. You would see the churn, and you would see the retaining players. Right. Now, do you know what the problem with this funnel is?
I think it's too optimistic, no? If that's every level, I can't imagine.
It's a generic data, so don't worry about. Don't worry. Yes, it's very optimistic. I mean, if you're, you have a game with, I think this is 8 levels.
You'll be a billionaire with this.
Yeah, this one is pretty good. So it's very generic, but the point is that you can figure out as much as telling like, okay, I have player and I don't have a player, right? So you can tell like how many players you retain and how many players are churned, but this data doesn't necessarily tell you anything other than just like what happened, but why it happened, you have
I
no
see.
idea. So,
Mm-hmm.
so the way I think about this, I want to go far more granular with setting up these events in the game design specs, saying that, hey, by the way, we're gonna measure this. I want all these steps in the funnel, and I want to go as granular as possible. So
Michal,
go for
one
it.
quick question. Would you ever use the previous funnel analysis, or you would just skip it completely?
What do you mean by previous
The
analysis?
the one FTUE first time.
For sure. I mean, it's better than nothing, right? So,
Okay.
you would certainly want to know this data, but it doesn't tell you much, right? It tells you what happens, but me as a designer, I'm providing experience, so I want to know why it happens, right? I want to get as
Yeah.
close as possible to the player's experience so I can fix it, or I can provide the experience that the player desires, right? And this is very difficult to do when you're behind the wall, like
Okay.
you're essentially, you don't see the player, you don't know how they play it. There's no qualitative data. This is just quant, right?
So can we say this is a basic analysis, and now
Yes,
you'll show us some more advanced one, right?
absolutely. So this
Got
would
it.
be just like setting it up by basic.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you want to go granular, what you can do is you can set up multiple different events. Like everything that the player can do in the game can be an event, and set up that in the funnel. So you don't end up having a funnel just like level to level, but what happens between the levels, right? Now, one really useful is that I like to take a look at the time deviation per level, and that tells me like immediately what is happening and why is it happening. I figure out a little later, but what is it happening, we're still staying on that part, like what is happening. Okay, the player's churning, but I'm going to figure out why and what else is happening. So the one thing that a lot of designers don't think about is the time, right? When I calculate the gameplay in terms of a progression, right? So how long, how much content I have in the gameplay, I think about the time, right? So I want to know how quickly the player consumes the content and how quickly is the player progressing through the content. And I want to look at every single player. So what I do is here is I look at the deviation between the player's time spent on particular events in the game. So for example, you have a level number 6, right? On this level, I can see that there's a majority of the players is spending between 100 and 200, 100 to 120 minutes. Sorry. To get to level 6, right? But the deviation between the players is really big. It's almost 120 minutes. That's like 2 hours. Some players take 2 hours more to get to level 6. And that's indicative of, well, there's something in terms of the either complexity or potentially cognitive load, potentially friction points that are causing
Right.
these deviation, right?
Mm.
So that tells me like, okay, well, not everybody plays the game same. And why not? If this is just level number 6, I originally designed this as a pretty simple level, but I can see there's a variety of different play styles here, and there's a variety of time spent on this. So maybe my estimates are completely wrong because of something in the game that is prolonging the time on this particular feature.
Got
You
it.
can stack it up. So let me just finish this one part. Is
Uh-huh.
I stack it up like you have a level number 4, 5, 6, and the red line actually tells you like this is 60 minutes in gameplay, right? So I've designed
Yep.
content, 60 minutes in gameplay. I did the onboarding for 60 minutes. I have the first time user experience design. This is 60 minutes, right? And I would like everybody within the 60 minutes to be on level number 6, right? Now, this chart shows me that that's not what's happening in the game. By default, the design, it tells like everybody should be level number 6 by 60, the minute 60. But the reality is that it takes far more time to get there, and something is causing that, right? So this granularity gives you far more detail in terms of your estimates and how good you are in terms of estimating the time in the game.
So what did you stack up here? Can we, like the first, second, and the third?
Okay, so do you want me to go back here? This one is bigger.
Yeah. But is it like for this is for one level, right? And for the next one, you stacked up different levels.
Okay, so there's an event in the game. Okay, it's generic data. By default, there's an event in the game, and we measure how much time passes between installing the game to reaching that event. Okay,
Right.
and we do that on a cohort of players, right? So this is a cohort, and on that cohort, we measured every single one of the player and put them in the percentiles, right? And that way we know that, okay, well, everybody by design, I said everybody should be, the peak should be 60 minutes, but actually the peak here is between 100 and 120. So by design, I thought about 60 minutes, but the reality is it takes far longer than the design.
Right. And in the next one, are those in the next one? Like now we have
on the next
3.
one, we do exactly the same thing per each level. So the first one is level number 4. And I say, okay, level number 4 is within the 60 minutes. That's the red bar. Okay. Now my design was 60 minutes would be level number 6. I think that's the setup is easy. The players can go through it, but the measurement tells me that that's not what's happening. They actually can get to level number 5 within the 60 minutes. And then the level number 6, where I potentially thinking about, hey, here's a progressive offer or a starter offer or something like that. Okay. And I design it like it's after level number 6. But unfortunately, the player would have to play a second session or maybe third session. That would they would see the offer, and by default in the funnel before, you can't tell anything of that. Like you can't tell, like, okay, well, level number 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here. I can't tell if they're. I can tell that I have 94% retention, but I can't tell if this is same day or next day or third day retention.
This is really good stuff, because by default I'm also thinking about the funnel, and as you like noted here, right, doesn't really make sense. How do you do this? Like, do you have a preferred tool, or you just export the raw data and kind of pivot it around?
Yeah, so it's like I'm not a data analyst. I can't tell you the inner workings of how this graph is put together, but what I can tell you is by default how I design it, right? So I put events, and each event would have timestamp on that, right? And I would say, look, here's an event that I want to time. The timestamp matters for me, and that's an event called like level complete, right? So that would be an event that I would have in game design, and I would say, okay, I want to take every single level complete event and stack it up in this chart, right? So that would be by default. This is my game design specification, where I say, here's an analytical event, right? And then data analyst would construct the data in such a way that the data analyst work, and probably backend would deal with that as well. So you would have engineer and analytics people taking care of this.
Got it. So basically, the tool doesn't matter as long as you have access to data. You can build this sort of stuff.
Probably not. I think you can construct this even in the spreadsheets. So as long as you have the data, you can construct this in spreadsheets, in like Google Sheets or Excel.
Nice. Okay. Right. Fantastic.
Okay, so let's move on to some of the friction points. So in terms of onboarding, so you're kind of thinking more about qualitative stuff here. So in terms of onboarding, I pay attention to something called black holes. So the black holes could be a result of what you see here on this graph, right? So you missed the target of 60 minutes and it's in level number 6, but why are they spending that much time, right? So now we're figuring out the part why, okay? So the part of why is that I actually spend a lot of time in going to second analysis, and that is by screenshot to screenshot. Like every single action that happens in the game is screenshotted, right? And then I put those screenshots on time scale. So what I did here is like I put a time scale of 5 minutes gameplay, and I want to see what's happening. And this is you can't do this by looking at the data, because you really need to have the picture of a player's perspective, like the experience that the player is experiencing, right? And by looking at the data first, so I look at like I have a problem. I'm expecting in the 5 minutes the players to be somewhere, and I can visualize what the experience is, right? So I put the funnel. So I put the deviation chart next to the screenshots, and I'm seeing, okay, well, here's a problem. I see that there's far more stuff on the screen in the 5th minute, right? And some of that stuff could be causing players to deviate into different players' journeys. And instead of me designing, like instead of them following the onboarding or the first time user experience that I designed, they're doing something else in the game. And that's what I call a black hole, right? So you're not necessarily designing it. It just happens to be there. Don't ask me for the scientific definition of black hole. I don't know what that is. But to me, it's something that sucks in the energy and it comes out somewhere else, right? So we don't exactly know what's happening in there, but we know it might be in the game and sucking up the player's time, right? So I did a Whiteout Survival first time experience breakdown. What I've seen in there was that in the 5th minute, they introduce a player profile. Maybe I can screenshot this. All right, maybe another time, because we'll be running out of time. But what happens is that they introduce a profile, and this profile took a player on a journey, essentially on something like 50 different options that they can take. So the player can spend time by introducing one button, which is the player profile, spend infinite amount of time going through that, because there's 50 different options that they can explore, right? Now this is just one button, but they introduce 4 more. So suddenly introducing 2-3 different features at the same time could prolong and exponentially increase the time that the player spends on that particular onboarding step, and your funnel just goes crazy. And what it ends up being is that, okay, well, the player got lost in the game. The result is churn, right? And it could be multiple things like friction points, black holes, could be different type of complexity you introduce, but the player just loses itself in the game and doesn't know where it is and potentially churns.
Yeah, this is like great. And I've seen like Michal has this huge mirror boards with literally every screen.
So I put a screenshot here, but it's very difficult to put it in it's a very large mind map of all the user interactions that they can take. So I map that out and figure out, is this affecting the onboarding, and is it affecting in such a way that the player might churn?
Right. So you have this qualitative analysis, and you take quantitative, and you merge them together.
That's correct. Yes, this is the perfect marriage.
Perfect game.
All right, cool. So let's go to the probably last one, and that is the loops create cohesion. So by default, the way I think about loops, so this is a bit of a theory, more of than applicable stuff. But once you understand the theory, you can apply that. So by default, the loop is that the player has some kind of mental model in their head of your game, right? They have some expectations, right? And something motivates them to play the game, whether that's really well put ad that resonates with players, somebody has introduced the game to them, they've heard about it, whatever. There's intrinsic motivation that the player wants to start the game. So they start the game, they create the mental schema of your game, which is essentially how do you play this game, or what are
Right.
the rules of the game, or what do I do, how do you control the stuff, right? Now they have some mental model. Now the game is trying to put them into the mental model that the designer created. So this is how you play the game, these are the rules of the game, let me explain it to you. That could be a design. It may not happen in the game. Maybe just players drop in the game and it's like, figure it out yourself, right? The player is going to take an action and the game is going to respond to those actions and give them feedback. Now, if the
Right.
feedback is, if the player understands the feedback, the player is able to improve their mental model, essentially change the way they think about the game to the way you as a designer or me as a designer originally designed it, and they're able to fix the mental schema. So that means that they started with a mental schema and they took an action, the game responded, they got a feedback, and they have a different mental schema. And that's what I essentially call a loop in the game. Now, you could have a game where people claim that there's a loop, but the feedback or the rules are so unclear that the player is unable to change their mental schema or unable to understand the game. So they kind of exit the loop. They're
Yep.
kind of like going on the tangent somewhere else, like maybe different feature, and then suddenly 10 minutes later, like, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm gonna go away, right? So the game actually never loops back to the origin. Okay, so that's by default, that's a theory of a loop. And in the free to play, this is very important because you want the player to loop continuously and improve that loop, improve that mental schema, and make it progressive, right? So you have meta involved that allows you to make the schema better, bigger, bigger, and more fun, essentially, right? So that's designer's job to create a looping game, especially in free to play, because you can monetize the player if the player continuously loops through things. So you can start putting monetization points in your loops and start making money on your game. This is, for example, a quick sketch of a Marvel Snap core loop. So I have multiple loops going on, but they're all start from the same thing. So you have the main gameplay, which is the playing the match. Now that gives you some rewards. Those rewards can be used in upgrading the cards that you play in the core gameplay. Now, the upgrading by itself is an activity, but it's not the core activity. So suddenly you have two activities in the game, and these two activities interchange the loops. So you could be going into one loop, or you could be going into another loops. This is a very well very well designed progression system and a system loop. It's not necessarily anything got to do with economy and stuff like that. It's just a system design that allows you to continuously loop players through different activities. And when you keep looping players, you know what happens? The players are retained. You succeed on your goal, keeping the player entertained and keeping the player in your game. So by having a good system design, having a good strategy when it comes to designing systems and designing the game as a free-to-play game, you're using a theory that affects your retention.
Right.
And this one is the most difficult one to get right.
So is it the key for long-term retention? So for example, if my mechanics are good, I can get like day 1, day 3. But if I want to get day 7, day 30, for example, I need to have those.
Yes. And here specifically on this point, it's not just about the number of features or what kind of features you have, but how well they're connected to each other. So Marvel Snap is one of the examples that I tell you. Let's go to the next slide, but visualize this.
Mm-hmm.
You have features that are connected to each other, right? So you have a season pass, you have a collection level, and you have leagues. All of these threes are tied to the same activity. So you play a game. At the end of that game, you get a rewards. You're going to upgrade your cards, and that puts you on the second loop, right? And you upgrade your cards, and that's
You're right.
going to give you on the season loop, right? So all of these are interconnected really well, and that retains the player, because if you just go through these 3 loops here, you end up spending like 5-10 minutes in the gameplay. And that means, like, okay, you don't necessarily need additional features, but you need these features to be connected because you're progressing through every loop. One loop could be 30 seconds, but another loop could be 2 minutes. Another loop could be 15 minutes. And another loop could be, oh, you need to complete this loop. You need 7 days, right? And suddenly your retention spikes because, or rather not spikes, but rather maintains, right? So thinking about the cohesion is very important going long term. So the long tail will tell you far more about the quality of your progression systems and your connectivity between your systems and loops than your the head of that retention. So the beginning features like onboarding, Fatui, they're impacting D1, D3, D7 maybe, but the loops are impacting far along, like D30,
Right.
all the way to 360, right? So your league could be impacting your players spending time in the game for a year or 2 or maybe 5.
Got it. One question though, like this is like huge titles, right? And like I don't worry much about like big companies because they can have their own department, they can hire you. I'm more worried about indie game devs. So what they can do to kind of create those loops or improve on the loops that they can have.
So first of all, like it's not a science. Like system design is not a science. It's just logical thinking. That's what it is, right? So if you're unsure if your system design is right, what you want to do is you want to validate that. And the best thing to validate that, you don't need to hire me or any other consultant to do that. You need to speak to the players, and that's essentially like what I advise the as a consulting to the clients is that, hey, if you're far away from players, like you can have as many departments as you want, as much resources as you want, but if you're not getting in touch with your players and understanding their players' behavior, ultimately building your player personas, the persona profiles, like what type of gameplay do we have here from their perspective? How do they play our game? If you're not getting in touch with your player, it's really hard to put a good experience, and especially free to play. Like you're trying to minimize the risk on your investment. Even as an indie, your investment could be just time, right?
Yep.
So you spend time on your game and you're not validating it with the player themselves. It doesn't matter how many people are in between you and the player. It really doesn't matter. It could be just you and the player, but you got to talk to the player. So if you see system design like this and the player saying, I don't get what the collection level does or how the league works, then it's pointless. Like it's not a good system design. So I could say as a consultant, like, this is brilliant, right? But the snap players are like, I don't know how collection level work. It's just I'm somehow doing it, right? And I could be living in the lie that this is a brilliant system design, but the players are saying otherwise.
Got it. Let's see. Let's see if we have anything else, Michal.
No, I think this would be the last slide. So
okay.
In the recap, we can go to the slide, and the recap would be just pay attention to these potential issues or problems that you have in your retention strategy, right? So focus if your data and analytics are telling you everything you need, right? Are you missing in data? Onboarding and Fatui, that's your D1, D3, maybe D7, right? If you need to fix that, focus. If you need to fix your D1 retention, of course, your D1 retention affects D30 as well, right? but it's not the end of all, right? If your D1 retention is anywhere in the 30%, 40% region, your game still can work, your game can make money, and you should be probably focusing on something else. And that something else could be gameplay activities. Like, do you have gameplay activities for D14, D30? Like, what is your player doing in a 1 month time, right? Pay attention to, hey, I designed this game for a year, right? But the player blasts through that in the month. Or the other way around, like I designed this for 1 year, and the player's like, I'm not going to spend this much time doing this. Like, forget it, right? So think about the gameplay activities. Now think about the game loops. Like, is your system design really good? Does it loop? Does it connect? Is it cohesive? Do players understand how they're supposed to engage with between different features? And then, of course, progression and meta, right? So, like, most of the time you think about progression as from an economy perspective, right? Is the progression meaningful? Does it give player agency? Like, is it what are they progressing in what they want to progress, right? Is the meta resonating with the progression that the player wants to have, or is it just like, we throw a lot of cards in there, the cards don't matter, but we have a lot of content for a player to consume, but nobody wants it, right? And then the last thing, retention features, right? Sometimes you just want to trigger player to come back. Sometimes you just want player, like, that extra additional motivation for a player to come back, right? It's really hot in my studio, right? What is the one thing that makes me come back to work? Well, I love what I do, but just having an air condition when it's really hot makes me like, coming to work. Like, I'm not going to spend the whole day doing something else because it's really hot, right? The retention features work like that. So it gives the player additional trigger to come back and do all of the above.
Nice. Michał, I'm sure you'll tell me we only scratch the surface here.
Oh, gosh.
Right? But we really need to wrap up. And I asked Michał to create a content for 20 minutes, and here we are at 45, but like super helpful. We'll leave a link to, I'm not sure where it leads, by the way.
It's my LinkedIn profile. So
okay, we'll leave a link too. So whatever is more preferable, we'll keep an eye on the comments, guys. So please leave your comments, give us a like, and maybe we'll do a part 2 on the retention. And this will be based on your new comments here. Again, thanks a lot, Michał.
No worries. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I like talking about this stuff. This is like very dear to my heart. Of course, we can talk about more retention. We can talk about monetization on maybe on the next one.
Yeah. Alrighty then.
Thank you very much, Roman. Bye.
Cheers.